So we've already been told some of the key measures to expect in the budget. Are they the right measures for the country right now? And how much of a role will politics and the election play in this latest fiscal plan from the finance minister when we see it? Let's bring in three economists for their views on what to watch for. Craig Alexander is the chief economist at Deloitte Canada. David MacDonald is the senior economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. They're with me in the studio, as you can see. And from Toronto, we're joined by Bill Robson, the president and CEO of the Howe Institute. Gentlemen, good to see you all. Let me start before we get into our discussion. Craig, let me maybe start with you here. Give us a lay of the land here. What is the fiscal situation, the economic situation of the country right now? Good news, bad news, as Bill Morneau gets set to deliver this budget ahead of an election.
Well, if we look back, I mean, the economy has been generating revenues above what the government was previously projecting. So in point of fact, tax revenues have come in a bit higher than anticipated, and that might give them a bit more money to spend. I think the big challenge is actually the economic outlook. Over the course of 2018, the economy weakened. By the end of the year, in the fourth quarter, the economy barely grew. It really stalled in the fourth quarter. In fact, were it not for unintended inventory accumulation, the economy would have contracted. And the first quarter is now looking very weak as well. So I think the real challenge for the government is that when you do your fiscal projection and you say, okay, so how much tax revenue growth are we going to have down the road? The answer is they're not going to have a lot of fiscal room to maneuver. And I think this is going to constrain their ability to make big promises in the upcoming budget, although they are obviously going to want to have a big budget, as this is a pre-election budget.
Yeah, Bill Robson, how far down the road do you think the finance minister will be looking when he unveils this budget tomorrow? If he's got some extra revenue because people are paying more corporate and personal taxes, if he's got a little more money to play with, should he spend it all, or what should he do with it?
Well, I think that he probably will spend a lot of it. I agree with what Craig just said. The government has had a tendency over the course of the budgets they've delivered to see these upside surprises on revenue, and rather than putting much of that toward the bottom line, they have tended to spend it. And in an election year, you asked about the time horizon. I think the time horizon's pretty short. The thing that I would just add to what Craig said, when we look at the recent performance of the economy, is that consumption's been pretty strong. Households, governments have been consuming away, and that's helped to keep the GDP numbers looking fairly robust. But lately, things have been flagging, and I think part of the difficulty is that we're just not seeing the kind of strength in business investment and on the trade side that we had hoped to see. And I think to some extent those are things that we could be looking for the budget to provide some help with. We've actually seen a little bit, and I underline this because it took so long to happen. We've been seeing a little bit of infrastructure spending happening. We've been seeing a little bit of robustness when it comes to the capital stock. But when it comes to business investment in machinery, equipment, and intellectual property, the real drivers of productivity growth, those are areas that have been very weak. So what I would love to see in this budget, but I'm afraid we're probably not likely to see very much of it, is a little bit of help for businesses that are looking to expand. I think that what's likely to happen is the government's going to say, well, we tackled tax depreciation in the fall update that addresses our competitiveness issues vis-a-vis the United States. I wish that it were true, but I think there's more that they need to do. So in the area where there are gaps between what I'd like to see and what I expect to see, that's one of the areas where I'm hopeful that I'll be pleasantly surprised, but I'm not really hoping for much in the budget.
All right, David, there's some suggestion now in the days leading up to the budget that the deficit's going to be smaller than the government had expected, so a little more room to play with. Should he be focused? Should he be worried about the deficit, or say, if I've got an extra pot of money, let me put it to good use?
Well, it doesn't seem at this point like the deficit is a big electoral issue. I mean, the deficit's been running about 1% of GDP, or about $20 billion for several years now. You could spend a bit more of that and you'd still see the debt-to-GDP ratio decline. And so even if we did see a reduction in revenues or an increase in expenditures due to a recession, if that were to happen, there's plenty of fiscal room for the federal government to spend more money against that type of recession.
Okay, let me drill down on a couple of things we expect to see, Craig. Let me start with you. A focus on housing affordability is something we're told to watch for, making home ownership more affordable for millennials and other first-time buyers. How does the finance minister do that without reheating the housing market and actually causing the same people trying to get into it to be stuck on the sidelines again or facing massive debt?
I think this is the big challenge when you tackle housing affordability. But when you look at polls of Canadians and you ask them what are some of their leading concerns, housing affordability ranks up close to #1. So I think this is why the government is likely to try and tackle it to some extent. What you have to be very careful about is basically putting in place policies that really boost demand for housing that then bids up prices and then, of course, makes affordability worse again.
Right.
In fact, most of the measures that improve housing affordability in the past have actually done nothing but benefit those that already own houses. So I think that the way they're going to tackle it is to focus only on the first-time buyer. Right? By doing that, you eliminate a lot of the buyers that are actually, you're not stimulating the rest of the buyers in the market. What they could do is allow longer amortization of your first home
right.
mortgage. I'm not wild about that. It just means taking on more debt. They could allow more RSP money to be withdrawn to make the initial down payment. They could do something on the first-time home buyers tax credit to make it a little more affordable, even though that tax credit's so small, it's a rounding error.
Bill, what are your thoughts on that, given that a lot of people are saying, look, you really can't deal with the affordability issue until you deal with the supply issue, that Canada's got a supply issue in housing as well?
Well, that's true. And the trouble for the federal government is that the levers that you pull in order to improve that situation are not at the federal level. It's really provincial and especially municipal. If you've got zoning that makes it difficult to build, then the feds can throw more logs on the fire the way Craig was describing, and it will just push the prices up. Craig's done work on this. In fact, the Howe Institute, we published some of it. So I think it's very brilliant work. To put a finer point on what he was saying, if you do focus on some of the, say, the new time home buyer, in fact, many of the people that might take out some additional debt are the ones who are most in danger of getting further extended beyond what's healthy to do. So it's tough because the feds have done a lot of sensible things, I think, recently to kind of watch out for a housing bubble and maybe take a little bit of the steam out of the market. So I don't see a big change of direction there. There might be something cosmetic here, but I'm not looking for something very major. I think there are a couple of other areas where they might be able to do some things. We've heard a little bit about, say, learning accounts, something like that. They might do something on retirement saving. They're under a lot of pressure to do something on pharmacare. I think we might see in the budget a few things, maybe on the medical expense deduction, maybe on helping people pay for very expensive drugs that would be good. So when we're thinking about things they might do to relieve the lives of the regular household and consumer, those would be some areas I'd look to as well.
David, let me have you pick up on the skills training piece. The government's, leaked or sort of floated out there that
idea.
They're going to, yeah, and I guess one of the questions is, if we have one of the lowest unemployment rates of all time, why do we need the government to help people with skills training? And connect that for me.
In large part because the corporate sector doesn't want to pay for on-the-job training, and so they have very low proportions of their payroll that's being spent on training their employees. One of the reasons why Quebec actually instituted a tax forcing employers to pay a certain amount towards on-the-job training for employees. I think what's concerning for students that are graduating, millennials who have just graduated with record high levels of student debt, from their perspective, they've done what they're supposed to do. They went to post-secondary education, university and college at a rate we've never seen before in Canada, at rates that are among the highest in the industrialized world. They come out of university or college, and then they're expected to save more for more training later on in life. And so I think I think this is really the wrong approach, particularly when we're seeing historically low unemployment rates, but not historically high wage gains. You need money in the bank to be able to save. And so these savings accounts aren't going to be that helpful if you're not seeing wage gains.
Which of you on that, Craig?
So I think one of the issues that you're seeing, like why aren't we seeing stronger wage growth in the market? And I think that what we are seeing is the demand for skills in the labor market have changed. So you have about 40% of employers are saying they're having labor shortages, but you're not seeing very strong wage growth. So why is that happening? And I think part of it has to do with workers that are very high skilled, that are in demand, are actually seeing good wage growth. But with technology, globalization, and other factors at play, demand for middle skill workers, traditional blue collar manufacturing type workers, demand for those workers are not in the same degree of demand. And so you're not getting the same pressure in the labor market, you're not getting the wage growth. If you actually look at, we have a 40-year low unemployment rate, but if you look at job vacancy numbers, we actually have elevated numbers of job vacancies. So there's jobs out there. The challenge is actually matching the skills that workers need. And so the lifelong learning account idea is to basically say, look, over your lifetime, when you leave school, you're not done. You're going to constantly have to retrain. You're going to constantly need new skills. You're going to need workers that are flexible in the labor market.
To David's point, who should pay for that?
Well, I think the answer is that we do need corporate training budgets to be larger, but I think also a lot of small and medium-sized businesses would argue they don't have the funds for worker training. And so if you have workers that can't get training in the workplace, I actually think you also need to have an account of this sort of design to encourage and also support workers that need to reskill. And the other thing is the technological disruption that's coming actually makes this even more important down the road.
We're going to be almost out of time, but David and Fernando, I want to hear from Bill.
I'm certainly all for lifetime learning. The issue is as tuition rates go up year after year, we're just pushing these expenses back onto the people who are in most need of this type of support. These learning accounts of $500, I mean, these are the types of increases you'd see on a one-year basis in tuition rates. And so this is, I mean, the idea here, I think, is that what we need is lower accessible tuition that doesn't cost a big upfront cost you got to save for over years.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like we're going to hear that in
no.
this budget.
No, but that's maybe a better policy.
All right, Bill, let me hear you on that, on this idea of how do we find a better way to make sure that workers are trained for the jobs that employers are looking for?
Well, again, it's hard for the federal government because many of the tools aren't at that level, but there are things they can do. And you think about how we treat investments that people make in their human capital. If you're in formal education, post-secondary education, you'll get a tax recognition of the cost of doing that. But later on in life, it doesn't come by so easily. And when you think about the logic of this, I mean, they're going to tax you on those higher returns if you do upgrade your skills and your income does go up. The federal government and all governments are going to take a cut of that. So why not be more generous on the way in? I think one of the troubles that we face in Canada is that the federal government, I mentioned retirement saving, and I know we're on a different topic, but there are areas where you'd like to see the government be a bit more generous in terms of letting people deduct from their incomes some of the costs that they have, including the costs of training and tuition. So whether the government can afford to give people a whole lot of money here, I would argue they've got to be careful about that. People have had varied experience with this type of accounts around the world. They don't always work all that smoothly, but there are all kinds of things that you could do to make it easier for people to do their training. Corporations can deduct some of the costs of employing people, so training ought to be affordable at the corporate level. If it's not happening there, as David is critical of, then let people make the deduction themselves as if they're going to be doing night courses and so on. And I think people would respond well to that. So there are things the federal government can do through the tax system. Not super generous. They're not a wand you wave and solve all the problems at once, but they help.
All right, gentlemen. We could have gone on. There's lots of other things to cover, and certainly we'll have a chance to look at some of these issues in more detail when we actually see the budget from Bill Morneau on Tuesday. But thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Pleasure. Thank you.